This talk is called Cursor for Staff Engineers, and for the most part, I think a lot of people have seen that in the past couple of weeks, we've really been pushed by tech leadership to just like aggressively adopt AI. But I think for the most part, at least what I see on Twitter or on LinkedIn, a lot of it has been like fixated on vibe coding, and this talk ideally won't be about that. It's not going to be about vibe coding. Instead, it's going to be about tackling the pain points that consume our time as senior engineers, and mostly is going to cover how we can automate a lot of these repetitive, tedious tasks that we all dread. And I'm really excited to invite Vig to speak on this. I met him through the AI consulting course, and I was really surprised to learn like how much you were crushing it through these implementation projects just using Cursor. And so before we start, I just want to ask what it would be the number one thing you want people to take away from the course, not from the course, from this talk.
Yeah, it's great to meet Jason. Honestly, he inspired me to get into some of this, along with a good friend of mine, Luke. They were both doing something similar. That's how I got into AI consulting specifically. I think my takeaway would be that even real engineers that are working on like real production products can use Cursor. I think I see a lot of what's online is one of two things. It's either people that are like Cursor is just gonna AI tools are just gonna write out all your code for you. You don't need engineers anymore. Agents are just gonna handle everything, which I think is a bunch of nonsense. And then the other side of it is people that are like, I'm perfectly content with writing all the code myself. I think AI is, I don't want to use it at all. They're like scared to use it. And what I'm trying to point out is if you can get to a place where you find repetitive things or common workflows that you're trying to just automate using AI a little bit more, you're still making all the decisions. That's the main thing. You're a staff engineer for a reason. And the reason you're a staff engineer is not because you're really fast at typing code or something. It's because you're making good decisions about a system and training other engineers. That's what it's about. And I think Cursor can help you with that. So because someone from Klein is here, I don't know if anyone from Windsurf is here, but this is not necessarily like Cursor focused. I just use Cursor a lot, but I think most of the talk, I'm not even going to show a single prompt for the entire talk. Because you guys all know how to like prompt things. I don't think I need to teach you that. It's more about I think the new age developer, the new age staff developer, how do they need to think about the engineering process when AI is involved? That's really how I think about this. So before I start, I have a lot of friends that work in sales, and one thing that you do is you just objection handle immediately. So I'm just gonna go through a list of things that people tell me about why they don't want to use Cursor, and then hopefully that'll clear up some things before I get into the talk. So one is I could code faster because I know the code base, like back to front, because you've been working somewhere for several years or you wrote all the code yourself. And because you know all of that, trying to give Cursor all the context is going to make you a lot slower than just like prompting. I think even if it's the case that you know a code base like super well, I would argue that actually helps you with Cursor because then you can point exactly at what you're trying to do, which files to look at, which context to give it. That is only going to help you. And I think the other thing that people really underestimate is how long it takes for them to type code. Like I don't type code as much as I honestly very little nowadays. And the reality is it takes a while. And it's just actually once you time yourself, I think you'd realize that you're better off explaining in English what you want the code to say tactically than typing it yourself. So that's one thing I would say. Another is it does too much. It makes a lot of mistakes. I think that largely has to do with what you're trying to get Cursor to do for you. I think if you're more clear about here are step-by-step things I want to actually get done, instead of just saying, I need you to build this new endpoint that it has no idea how to do, that's just not going to work very well. And mistakes, I think, yeah, it's inevitable that tools are going to make mistakes. I think how I look at it is like actually use all the systems that we built over the last 30 years in software engineering. Use Git. Get to a place where your code's in a decent state. You can use Cursor to try something. And if it doesn't work, you just reject it or you can try again. So I think if it makes mistakes, that's fine. My take is a huge mistake I see people do is they'll try a prompt once and then it'll fail and then they'll just go back to writing the code. And my argument is you should try 5 times Like you should try 5 times in the same context window. You should open a new context window and try again. And the argument is, first of all, it might be faster. Second of all, the more you push yourself to do that and you believe in Cursor to, I know it sounds ridiculous, but the more you believe in the system, I think you're going to get better at finding prompts and patterns and things. It'll be in your brain to do more complex things over time. So that's very important. And the second thing is you can, as a staff engineer, part of your job is to train other people. And I think the more you can learn how to use AI, you can teach that to the rest of the team, which is super valuable and important, especially for like more junior engineers. I'm still learning what kind of advice to give them nowadays. So I think learning these tools is important for that. Only works if you're working on a new code base. This whole talk is going to talk about things that work on existing code bases and production code bases. That's all the work I do. I usually do 2 or 3 implementation clients a month, and I have a few advisory clients as well. So these are all things these examples are things I've done in the last month. Takes away the joy in writing code. I have heard this argument more recently from people. At the end, we'll have 20 minutes for questions. So if this is, you can let me know. But I think the people that love writing code can still love writing code. I just don't think that's what matters when you have a job. I think in the industry, the thing that's going to matter more than ever is results. And results is often like shipping things that matter to people. So if AI can help you do that, I would just reorient yourself around that is what I enjoy doing. And in a way, it's actually made me love coding ever, like even more than I used to, honestly, all this stuff. Last is people love NeoVim. Okay, I'm gonna go. I use NeoVim for 10 years. My good friend Mark is here. He was the one that kind of got me into some of this stuff as well. But yeah, if you want to use NeoVim, fine, go for it. But I think the times are changing. I'm just like unconvinced that I know the guy like Yassine or whatever on Twitter says he has a NeoVim setup that works perfectly. I'm unconvinced. So anyways, this is as McKinsey as this talk will get. I wanted to give you a 3-step thing that I actually use. This is not something I made up. This is how I actually think about using Cursor. And I'll repeat this within the talk. So explore is basically a phase where you want to tell Cursor like what context it needs to know about the problem you're trying to solve. What is the problem you're trying to solve? Come up with options with it of what you could do, how you could build it. Plan is mostly about let's actually pick an option and figure out step by step how we're going to go about doing this. Especially for a task that ends up like getting pretty big, you want to do that because otherwise you're going to end up telling Cursor to do way too much at once. That's a very important step. Third is build. Build is oftentimes once you plan, hey, this is a step I want to do, you can just tell Cursor, let's do 1 step of it. I'll review it. And you can think of it almost like you're reviewing a PR from like an intern or something. You want to give it a small step. And when you review it, maybe you have to make some edits. Maybe you have to prompt it a little bit. Maybe you have to go into the code and change it yourself. Maybe you have to try again. But that's all like understandable and acceptable. What I'm going to do is instead of just giving you like a high level framework, I'm going to give you examples, 3 examples of things that I actually do day to day. So these are things that I've done in the last week or 2, I think. So one is test stream development. So how do you use Cursor to write better tests? The reason why I think this matters is one, I don't know very many engineers that love writing tests. They're very important. If you work at a startup, I think it's typically the first thing that gets cut is writing tests. If you work at a large company, they're very important, and I would argue that Cursor can help you write better tests. So that's really what we're going to cover. The way I look at Cursor in the explore phase is you need to share context about which files you want to actually test. So let's say you have an SDK that you want to test. What I would do first is I'd tell Cursor, hey, here's like the folder, or here's the file that I'm trying to test. Here's the entry points. Can you look at this file and tell me which other dependencies, other things I need to look at to basically figure out what is the right things that we need to test? What are the types of tests that we can build? And I'll let Cursor do this on its own once, but if it doesn't work as well as I would expect, I will tell it straight up. Here are the files I need you to look at. Here's similar tests I want you to build against. And then you can talk with the agent. You can literally be like, hey, I think we should build these types of tests. Like, what are other edge cases I should consider? It's super useful because I almost treat talking to LLMs now like having a team of staff engineers that all understand your code base like reasonably well and are domain experts in like things that you don't know about. That's largely how I use LLMs now when I'm coding. So that's like the first step. You just want to come up with ideas. You want to think about what are the types of things I want to test. The second thing, this is very important, is you want to actually create a plan. And I'll show you an example of what the plan looks like. I have some screenshots of what the plan looks like. But the way I look at it is if you tell Cursor, okay, cool, you figured out what we should test, how we want to test it, all good. Just go ahead and do everything. The agent, I have yet to see that work properly. And I know there are companies out there that are trying to like solve this problem. I think like Devin is trying to do something. My understanding is they're doing something similar to this, except in an automated way. But yeah, I literally like so there's a question, but I don't use like an MCP for this or anything, but I'm literally just creating a markdown file myself. I tell it, hey, create a step-by-step plan for this and save it to a markdown file. And I put like checklists on it basically so that it knows when it goes back and looks at it, how far it is, what steps it needs to do still, all of that. And the good thing about this is let's say like I don't know, you open a new context window, you can just give it the markdown file and it'll generally be able to figure out like how far it is if you like restart your computer, whatever the reason is. So here's like an example of this. This is not the exact problem I was working on for a company recently, but let's say you need to build like a schema validator. And the schema validator is for products. Products have different attributes on them. And all the attributes are stored in a database table where it's essentially like the org ID, the attribute name, and then the type of the attribute is all saved in one place. And you need to take all of those and create basically like a Zod object or like a Pydantic object that you can use to validate the schema. And this is super relevant for, especially in the LLM world, where if you use something like constructor, you need to pass in these types to get structured output back. And honestly, I think it's very important to get good testing around these types of things. Otherwise, it's just going to break your app. So what I'll do is I'll say, hey, I already have this file. I already have this product utils file that generates these schemas for me. Can you come up with a plan for me? Let's come up with a plan. And I'll talk back and forth. Once I've talked back and forth and I'm like generally on the same page with it, I'll tell it, okay, come up with a plan. And this is kind of like step one, right? Step one is just setting up the mocks for it that mocks all the database utils. It like puts in the dependencies it needs. It creates the file. So that's kind of like step one. And once it's done, you'll see like little check marks on all of it. Then this is like the second step where it says, hey, we need to actually create those helper functions. We need to create the mocks. We need to do this. And it'll start doing that based on the actual type system. This is why TypeScript is so good for in the cursor world. TypeScript, good linting, all of these things. It just helps it know how to build things properly. And this is an example of a step that's not completed yet. We need to actually write tests for each of these different schema creations, like Booleans, numbers, date times, and we'll need to test all these different edge cases. And I'm not telling you that an engineer can't like actually go do this on their own. What I'm saying is that there's no reason for you to write all of this on like by yourself anymore. I just don't think that there's like a good justification for it. Think about the amount of time it might take for you to write all these tests yourself. At best, you can maybe leverage yourself by delegating it to someone else, but I'm not like a huge fan of that. I think like in the world we're in, we're gonna have to all figure out how to be more productive like individually. So that's how I think about it. When you apply the steps one by one, that way you can make little adjustments if anything's not working. You can make little changes. And the biggest thing is you got to commit all this to Git. If you just try to go through all the steps at once and then it doesn't work, Cursor's checkpoint stuff is just not good. And it's just not set up for this type of thing. I'm a very big fan of Git. I love Git. And I think it's no different. You should just continue using that. I would just update the plan file as you go. Yeah, really believe in Git is my number one feedback on all this. So the takeaways here, the tests actually get written. Like honestly, if you work in startups, like tests sometimes just don't happen. Even if you get interrupted, you have to go back and lose all the context. You don't have to rebuild all that context. It lives in the plain doc. And then the other thing is, this is great if you want to write tests before you write the code. I think that's the thing that we've lost as an industry because it's so annoying to do it. But if you create all the interfaces, you describe what you actually want to build first, and you create all the tests for it, that's even better. I think that's great. But an alternative is, let's say you have an area of your code base that has no testing. I think this is another way to explore, okay, how do I figure out what this code is doing? I think writing tests is a really great way. Okay, so another example is load testing. So as a staff engineer, one thing that you need to be able to do is really understand the system that you're actually working with. You need to be able to understand, what are the constraints I have? What are the performance characteristics of it? What is it that we're trying to optimize for? And honestly, I think this is also work that's really hard to justify sometimes, like to management and stuff like that. But it's really important and very hard to delegate. What I found is that Cursor helps me actually do this type of work very quickly. I can time box it basically. Say, all right, I have 15 minutes. I want to understand this code base a little bit more and present an insight to the team. So the way I look at it, this is another problem we were working on recently. So VLLM is like an inference engine. So if you're deploying a model on your own VPC instead of using OpenAI or something, you basically need to use something like VLLM to actually run inference. So in our case, because we were running this, we didn't have a great understanding yet because we were new to it of what are the performance characteristics? How many requests should we be handling at once? What is like a reasonable cutoff before we need to scale up or scale down so that the users are like not getting performance degradation? What is like the tokens per second? All of these things that we want to understand. The reality is these types of load testing scripts are different for every system. For anything that you want to test, I've seen companies try to make like utils and stuff for this to share some of it over time so that it can be reusable. I've never seen it work. It ends up as scripts that are manual every single time. So that's fine because now you can use Cursor to rip these out way faster. So one thing I would do is you don't really need to plan that much for this because it's largely a throwaway script, or it's just something that maybe lives in the repo and you're not going to be editing that much. It's not something that's going to production necessarily. It's working with a production system. It's not going to production. So I wouldn't use the giant markdown planning file for this. I don't think you need that. But I think you can still use Cursor, come up with things that you might want to test about the system. I think that's what Cursor can be useful for, is treat it like another staff engineer on your team that you're just like pair programming with or thinking through ideas with. I think it can be really useful for something like that. And the actual process for building is stuff that you know how to write code for anyways. It's really just, okay, we need to set up multiple threads for the system. And this is an example that we went through. These are like 7 examples of things that we added to the system over time. You need the initial setup for the script. Here's the endpoints. You add it to the context. You say, I want to call this endpoint with this many threads at one time. You set that up. Then you say, all right, I want to maybe call this with a configurable number of threads at a given time to see how the performance is. Once you actually figure that out, you need to start collecting timing data. So you need to know, okay, what's the tokens per second on each of the threads? You need to like start tracking that somewhere. Maybe you want to see at any given time, as it's completing, you want to see that live in the CLI. Maybe you want to measure, okay, I have 10 requests. Does the tokens per second of the whole system increase while each thread decreases? These are things that generally you would want to know about the system, but that you're limited by the actual time you have to write the code. And explaining it to someone else might not be like super worth it. So the way I think about it now is you're no longer limited by writing the code. You're limited by the ideas you have that you want to test. And secondly, it'll actually get done. Because I don't think you need to go into your stand-up meetings anymore and be like, hey, I'm gonna spend a day or two back and forth. I'm gonna be setting up a load testing script. You don't have to prove that to all the VPs and stuff anymore. You just spend 15 minutes doing this, see if you get anywhere with it. And if you get somewhere, maybe then you can go back to them and say, hey, this was super valuable. Maybe we should be doing this more often, whatever it is. That kind of experimentation, I think, is super valuable. And the other thing is, as a staff engineer, you really do need to know the context on the system. You need to know how your system works. I think this is true at the director and manager level too, but the talk isn't really for them. As a staff engineer, you own the system ultimately. So if you're not doing this, who is going to be? That's my take on it. Another kind of, so far I've given you an example of something that needs to integrate directly into a system, unit testing. A second example is working on top of an existing system, so load testing, building a script on top of it. This one is more of like a workflow. Everyone's getting PR comments. So you have PR reviews, you have comments being given to you. I think most people hate getting nit comments like, oh, change the padding to 5 pixels, or hey, can you like move this file here or rename this or whatever, all those little details. I've never liked dealing with that stuff. I just always hate it. But I think most of it is relatively trivial for some kind of copilot to handle nowadays. So my process, and you're gonna think I'm crazy, but I'll explain why I do this. I literally go into GitHub, I screenshot every single PR comment as an image and I make sure that the file name and all that is in the screenshot. Then I drag and drop all of those. And no, you can't do GitHub PR review comments because it doesn't have the line numbers and stuff. Trust me. So I then put all of that into a single cursor context. And I say, hey, I need you to go ahead and just list out what I gave you so far. And I like verify that the OCR and all that are good. Doesn't the GitHub? All right, I'll answer your questions after. So the PR comments, then I ask it to group all the related changes. And I say, just once you've grouped everything, make a planning file. And I put all the file name, the line number, and just the comment itself. I don't do anything of figure out how to fix this yet. This is all about just storing the context in a single place. And the last thing is I say, hey, go read the planning file and read each one by one. And the agent at this point will be able to say, all right, this is this line number in this file. It'll look up that file for context. It'll find all the relevant other files that it might need. And it'll like generate that. And all the small little details are so easily fixed nowadays, like trivial to fix. And I just commit those. And then I just update the planning doc that it's like not a big deal. But the second thing is that larger changes, you might just need to do some prompting work on your own, or you might have to go in and edit it yourself. But honestly, if you're saving like 70% of your time, for me, it feels like way more than that. I did see a point that it's good to propose a solution. I think that's great, but like at this point, I'm like, you should propose. I think you should just, if this was like automated somehow, I think that's totally fine too, but I'm like not convinced that we're that close to being able to do it. I have heard of other people doing things like Jason actually apparently has a way to do the Git commands in Cursor itself so that it'll create stacked PRs for you based on all the PR comments. I am not convinced that giving Git access to a Cursor agent is a good idea, as maybe you saw when it deleted all of his code one day. So I'm not there yet, but maybe we're getting there. But yeah, the takeaways is really you want to focus on the stuff that actually matters. Everyone's going to get annoyed about nit comments and little things, but if you don't have to think about them anymore, then it's not an issue. Now, maybe someone in the comments has a better way to do all this with the API and MCP. If you do, you can tell me. Trust me, I'm always willing to learn things, but I have yet to figure out how to do it. So I literally just screenshot things. I'm not gonna get bogged down by MCPs if I don't need to. That is a list. Those are 3 things that I've done with Cursor. I'm just trying to give you examples of how you can start thinking about using this day to day. But here's like a giant other set of things that I've used Cursor for over the last 2 or 3 really Cursor and LLMs generally. Cursor really I've only been using for a little over a year. But this is the only reason I can do what I do as an independent consultant. There's just no way I could continue doing implementation clients and work with as many key people as I'm working with, and especially going into new code bases every single month, and I have to learn them very quickly. And what I'm showing you is what I do. I have no reason to, I have all incentive to only be honest with you. I'm trying to be like the most honest person talking about using Cursor on the internet. So that's my take. Jason, do you want to cover it from here a little bit?
Yeah, so what we're probably gonna do is I left a link in the chat. We can probably leave some comments, we can upvote them, stuff like that. And then one thing I just wanted to call out too, I only saw this recently, but on March 27th, this article came out that kind of blew my mind, where Airbnb used AI to finish 18-month code migration in just 6 weeks. And again, it's basically exactly what you did with propose, make a plan, run tests, take the errors, reiterate, reiterate. And yeah, it was mind-blowing to see how things are done. But yeah, if you have any questions, leave them in the Slido. And another thing that someone had asked was, do you have any demos? I know it's probably hard to share production code just because you have I know you have five
Yeah.
laptops, but
What
just
would the
comment a little
demo
bit on that.
be? Like, I would share like this is what I was wondering. Like, I share prompts. Like, I share like these are prompts I did, or because ultimately, I think I'd have to live stream myself, like writing code. I think maybe what I could do is ask Jason, well, what's a PR that needs to be written in Instructor, and then just sit there and live stream me doing it for an hour or something.
I mean, a
I
lot of
don't
the work in
know.
instructor has been documentation these days and like reorganizing a lot of the examples to be more like educational. That has been a huge lift for me. Here's all the concept documentation. Here's the
Right.
API. I want you to propose me a plan of how to organize content in a way that is educational and then
I
do it that way. That has been super helpful.
There's something there, honestly. It's interesting once, like, I work in applied AI, right? So I understand how Cursor works. Like, high level, I feel like once you understand what it's doing a little bit, it helps a lot. Once you realize that a lot of what the agent is actually doing is once it creates code, right? It's verifying that it works or not. And largely it's relying on like the type system and the linter. And it's just like going back, like redoing it over and over again. And I think they figured out that people were, when Cursor first came out, I would generate code and then I would run it and it would cron an error and I would hit the debug button. It would go back and do it, change code. I'd do that over and over again until the code ran. And I think that was like the initial vibe coding attempt. And they've gotten a little bit smarter about it, but that's what it's doing for the most part. But
Mhm.
yeah, demos, I think that's something we need to figure out. Like, how can I
Yeah.
really, I
I,
was avoiding demos because I was like saying, this is a group of staff engineers. These are people that have code bases and complex code bases that they know better than me. And I'd rather give them like a framework of how I think about this and
Mhm.
examples and be like, here's one random code base that I've worked with that's not even the real code base because it's under NDA. And I'm gonna fake it, basically. That was my concern with the thing.
Yeah, maybe
But
what we
we'll
can do is like next time we'll just do a lighting lesson that is just pure live coding or something like that. I think that would be pretty useful. We'll just send an email afterward just because, yeah, then we can probably do something that's a lot more. Let's make some contributions to another repo, rather, or make a new like
right.
Movie app or something. We can just set aside some time for that. But it does look like there's a ton of people who want an exit demo. And mostly what I've seen on Maven in the past has been like, how should a PM learn to use Lovable or use Cursor? But I think I'm
Drives me
very
insane.
curious to see how you do these because I know you're probably a stronger developer than I am. I actually use Cursor a lot for doing data analysis and research rather than spin up an entire app from scratch. But I think we have enough questions and upvotes. So do you want to jump into some questions?
Are you asking me? Let's do it. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
down.
Do you have any suggestions for cursor rules or how we can dynamically generate some of these things? What kind of rules do you find yourself making?
I don't use any rules. This is a hot take. I don't think cursor rules matter that much. I think what matters is knowing your code base and providing good context and giving it tactical things to work on. I think all this stuff around like, oh, we needed to know all of the design patterns that we have in the company, and I wanted to make sure that it formats lines this way. Or I know people are trying to do this stuff, but I've only found it to drag me down. So I work on so many different code bases that I'm not going to go in and make a bunch of curse rules for each one. I'd rather just rely on the LLMs getting better. So yeah, I don't really use cursor rules. MCPs, I think I have used some. I've used some, but honestly, even that, call me a boomer, but I will straight up just go to a doc site, literally copy the entire docs page, paste it into context, and be like, "Yo, here's all the API docs for." I can't believe I'm saying instructor again. I use instructor literally all the time, so it's like a
That's
real.
how we met. This is the context setting.
I think instructor is the only AI tooling that actually matters to me. I don't use a ton of other stuff, so I
Mhm.
just a good example for me, but. I had to do something with Twilio recently, right? So I literally just copied Twilio, like all the docs for a certain page, and I just said, here you go. Can you do something with this?" And it tends to work pretty well for me. I did it with SlideV. Okay, so this entire presentation, I wrote it in SlideV, which is like a markdown slide generator. And it was because I just thought, okay, I'd rather, for lack of a better word, like vibe prompt my way through writing the slides. Yeah,
Maybe you
so it's
should
a
show
little.
slide view a little bit because I say this only because I feel like I have to make so many presentations and have been really valuable. But yeah, maybe we can do this at the end.
Maybe I can here. I can share my screen with the. Hold on, let me stop sharing, and then I'll share it once I get the cursor back on with the thing on. Oh, there's way more people on here than I thought.
Yeah.
Okay, might take a second to load. Sorry, guys.
Yeah. I'll do a follow-up question, which is I work with a code base and spend a lot of time maintaining code and fixing bugs and less time writing new code. How do you think of using AI in this case?
What was the question? Sorry.
How much time do you spend using AI to do like code maintenance and like bug fixes versus like writing net new code?
Oh,
I think for me, I
uh,
most of my code is maintenance.
really, almost none of mine is. I mostly work on new products and new features. I don't really. I do have to touch a lot of legacy code,
Yeah.
so I have to understand code very quickly. So it's
Oh, by the
important
way,
for
do you mind
that.
zooming in on your cursor so people can see a little bit better?
Oh yeah, sorry guys. I have tiny font sizes. So this is basically like the entire presentation. You can make like divs and using Markdown. I made all of the diagrams like this with, yeah, so all the code examples are in here as well. It's pretty nuts what you can do, honestly. This is a good example. So let's see if I can show the prompts. So is it in here? Oh my God, all the prompts are gone. See, this is the thing with cursor sometimes. All the prompts are gone. Okay. Anyways,
I think this is a really important question, actually. Can you share your practice on how you sort of like onboard on a new code base?
it's a good question. So typically the way my like applied AI stuff works is we'll figure out some problem that we want to deliver in a month. It's usually scoped to a month. So I'll go to the company, I'll say, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And a lot of time is spent on what is the actual problem that we're trying to solve? What are the systems that we need to integrate with? And then typically it's like a SWAT team basically where I'll make a shared Slack channel. It's just me, the CTO, two staff engineers, and the most senior SRE at the company basically. And that's all the people that are allowed to be in the channel. And I'll just talk to them about like how the system works. I'll ask them questions. Then I'll do an exploration with Cursor. I'll just say, here's the directory I'm looking at. Can you like look at the directory tree structure basically, explain what's going on in here, tell me what relevant files I should read, basically. And I'll start even being like, these are things I'm thinking about building. What files should I look at? And I'll do that for like several hours sometimes. It works pretty well for me. But I'm still definitely relying on other people at the company that know the code bases. I'm not claiming that I can just go into a code base that I have no context on and just use Cursor to figure it out. I don't think that's very realistic. And that's not actually a necessary expectation, is my take.
Make sure to just post another link one more time. There's been a lot of new questions, but I just want to make sure. Are you open to sharing the slides on GitHub at some point?
Oh, these?
Yeah,
Sure. Why not?
cool. I think I would love to answer this question just because it's really close to me, which is any advice on doing machine learning and data science workflows? A lot of for me, it has been like replacing a lot of the boilerplate of experimentation, right? There's no reason you shouldn't be having like really nice plots, right? It's like, look at the CSV file, write the matplotlib code. Yeah, make it really good. It'll have a legend, it'll color code things. Include the dot size as another variable. It'll go do that. Great. Propose new hyperparameters. Right? I trained one model, but actually I want you to set up the parameterization optimization. Those are small things where it's code I wouldn't want to do. maybe I write the code in a for loop, and then now there's too many things. Great. Use multi-threading. Go. And it will really help a lot of the processing. But a lot of it, at least for data science and machine learning, is just the fact that you really have no excuse not to have really good data visualizations at this point. In Python, I would have a matplotlib thing. But now, if it's really important, like I had a client of mine that we realized we could do some kind of like revenue calculation. Historically, I would have shown them a plot, but instead I just said, make a small React app that is this like pricing calculator. And now we have just like a data visualization tool. And it would have taken me the same time to make this like React app than it would have me use pandas and make a lot of data visualizations. And that has been like probably the highest impact thing I've been able to do with the Cursor, at least on the data science side, which is just more communication, more data visualizations. Yeah, you mentioned you don't use that many MCPs. Are there any tools you wish did exist for something like Cursor? I know the client
Oh
folks.
yeah, it'd be great to have this GitHub comments thing. If anyone from GitHub is here, let me know. I want to get that fixed.
Oh yeah, like
Um,
a MCP that just pulls the file line number and the comment.
it should be a trivial fix from them. I don't think it's like a big. I don't know anyone there. I think one thing, actually, a company. Is anyone from Relay here? I'm working with them, but they're looking at basically connecting Figma into Cursor like a little bit better. I've been reading about it over the last few days to see if you think like V0 and like Lovable are on one side of the spectrum, and then you have like manually coding basically on the other side of the spectrum. I think, and Cursor is somewhere here. I think you want something in between V0 and Cursor where you can give it a design and say, hey, here's our design system, here's our components, and I need you to just generate an initial setup for the UI for this in React. And I think that would be super useful, honestly. I just think, I don't know if we're there yet. I don't know if the tools are there yet. I feel like we will get there over the next couple of years, maybe less, but that's the thing I'm very interested in. I am also very interested in better tooling around MCPs for proxying. I think they're like not great for security. So like it's very difficult for me to advocate for using them for like production use
Oh, you know
cases.
what? There is an MCP client that inspects network logs.
Oh yeah, really? Interesting.
Yes, I think that has been useful. Or there's an MCP that can get the Chrome console.
Okay.
So you
Yeah.
can like do like dev tools like inside your single instance. I know Windsurf, for example, has a browser tool that opens a browser in Windsurf, and then you can select divs and then put them back into the prompt. Like I would love that for a slide V thing.
I think a particularly useful trivial one is like the Postgres one that
Yeah,
exists where you just connect it to Postgres and say, hey, can you give me an example of something in a database that like fits this filter? That's like super useful for building things, right? That's something that you're gonna have to go open. Oh my God, every time I have to open the Postgres terminal, log in, query the
exactly.
first thing, copy it. I'm in Tmux, so like the copying doesn't work, and then I paste it back. It's just such a pain, honestly.
Oh,
I
this is a
think,
good question I want to ask, actually.
yeah.
When do you choose not to use cursor?
Basically never at this point. I had to write code manually at one of my projects recently. I'd be like, okay, cursor's not working 3 times. I have to type it now. And I, even at this point, if I have to do even like a rename a variable in one place, I'll still use cursor for it. I just
Oh
think
no, you're
staying,
cooked.
no, I'm insane because I just think the staying in the flow state, my text cursor is never in the code area anymore. It's always only navigating on the left or it's in the right side like instruction window thing. And maybe I'm like on the extreme crazy end of this, but I just would rather believe that the LLMs are only going to get better. The tools are only going to get better. So there's almost no situation where I say I can't break down the problem enough to use cursor to do it. It like never happens to me anymore. And I hope it doesn't sound like I'm exaggerating or something. It's just really what's going on.
Interesting, interesting. We have 12 minutes left. If anyone has any questions, maybe you can use the Zoom raise hand and then you just pitch in anything else. I want to make sure
Yeah.
we have a
Oh,
little bit
there's
of
a lot
interaction.
of comments. Oh, wow. A lot of comments. I didn't
Yeah.
read all these. Sorry.
Yeah, there's some like browser tool comments here. But yeah, if anyone wants to say something live, feel free to just unmute or raise your hand.
I just send
Dexter.
it.
Hey, thanks for that. Really cool to hear. I was wondering if you ever run into having to deal with credentials in .env files and keeping them out, because Cursor has this whole thing of an ignore, dot cursor ignore, and you can keep files out of the context, but it's non-deterministic. So you
Okay.
don't actually have any guarantee that it will stay out of going to the inference. So
That's definitely
yeah,
happened to me.
Oh,
yeah,
I've
it's
not
happened
run.
to me as well. So I have a way of dealing with it, but I was just wondering if
Okay, what's
there's
your way of dealing with it?
I you can put it in like the parent directory and then reference it like upper
Interesting.
level, but it's a pain. You just want it to be there.
Yeah, I'll make one comment, which is I think this is something that needs to happen within the IDE. Warp dev, for example, which is like the AI in your terminal, that it knows not to read dot files. So I think in the future it'll just be solved by cursor. Like otherwise we can just prompt it in or have a rule, but it feels very silly.
I'm sure someone has a better suggestion than I do here, but I really don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Ben?
it's all good.
We have a lot of really good, smart people on this call. All of this stuff has been moving so fast. I was just curious if there are things like I've seen Taskmaster that I think is an example of an NPM repo that works fairly well for managing tasks and keeping things on task. In my mind, I feel like I think Vig expressed it concisely as I'm just relying on the LLMs to get better. I see that something like Taskmaster might be really useful, but I am hesitant to invest in those kinds of tools or MCP servers just because I feel like it might be a temporary fix for a problem. But I know we have some folks who are actually working in the space on these tools. Does anybody either have experience with Taskmaster or see the trajectory for those tools? And is it worth investing in bringing those in as part of our workflows? Just generally speaking, I guess would be my question.
Nick, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think, yeah, at Klein, like we're working a lot. Like context management is a challenge. It's like an ongoing problem for a lot of these coding agents. I think there's like a number of ways of solving it. I think largely it's the way that like what I found works the best for when we're developing Klein is narrative integrity. So like every task that happens in Cursor or in Klein, it's basically a story. It might be a very boring story of a lonely code agent helping you write code, but everything makes sense in the story. It's coherent. So you have a system prompt, that's the setting for the story. Then you have the task, which is like the challenge to be overcome. And then you have the protagonist, which is like the agent helping the user overcome this problem. And as long as the story kind of makes sense, LLMs are really good at predicting the next token. So they'll be able to continue the story, which means like getting you closer to that resolution. But you start running into problems when the story gets convoluted and it starts getting overloaded, like this context overload. So how do you manage that? One is having good hygiene around your tasks, which is creating a new task, doing task handoffs, things like that. Unfortunately, that's still something you have to do. We're working on ways of automating that potentially in the future, having some kind of orchestration, multi-agent potentially. But right now, the best thing you can do is just hand off tasks when like some kind of discrete workflow is finished. You want to hand off your progress over to a new task, summarize everything that you've done so far with like specific file names and what there's left to do. But yeah, that's actually one of my questions. Have you guys, Vinesh or Jason, have you guys been playing around with context management? How do you guys handle that?
I can
Very
go for it just
curious
because
to.
I modify very large files because I actually do a lot of my writing with Cursor. Like what I really just do is once I, for example, write a bunch of stuff, I'll say read all of these, create a style guide, and then create a style guide MD file. Right? Okay, everything that you've learned about the feedback I've given you on color coding parts of these slides, add a like slides guide MD file. Okay, then I have a conversation where I'm iterating on like the speaker notes and the tone. Great, now write like a speaker style guide. And then I'll start manually referencing them across the pages. So that's one thing. The second thing is with the to-do lists. I basically would tell it to propose a sequence of PRs, and then each PR, what are the requirements? And I tell it to like work on each PR, make the pull request, and continue. What I'll notice is if the to-do lists are too long, it'll still hallucinate. Right. So if I say, here's a to-do list where I need you to review 35 pages of documentation and make sure each one has the same structure because it wasn't before, by like file 15, it's like creating new to-do lists for files that don't exist. And so at least for the to-do list, I guess keeping them small is also very helpful. And I would rather have 5 to-do list files, one for each PR, than while one file that contains 6 PRs where each PR has 7 tasks or something like that. So that's like some of the stuff that I've really figured out on my end.
I don't know. I think my take is you can treat it like I almost treat it like this is something I'd be doing anyways. This is maybe a hot take, but I think a lot of engineers really like tunnel vision. There's engineers that just love getting into a dark room and sitting there for 30, 40 hours straight and getting a problem, not being asked anything about it the entire time. They don't want to have to explain anything during that period of time. And they're just like, hope and pray that we will come out at the end with what we want. And I think that is a way to code, but it totally does not work when you want to use AI assisted tooling because you have to very clearly tell you like what you want it to do. It to me, like a lot of people don't have a ton of experience with pair programming, even like pair programming, you need to be able to explain to a person sitting next to you what's going on in your brain. And a lot of people, it's very difficult to do that, to identify these are the tasks I want to do. This is the context I want to give. This is a skill to build, honestly, for people. I learned a lot of this in college. I had a couple of great professors that taught me these things, and I still use it now, but it's called the design recipe back then in college. But I think that affects it. So to me, I'm like, we need to get better at that and get better at that manually before we start trusting tools to generate all the tasks for us and hand off and all this stuff. I'm like, why don't you figure out how to create what tasks are and then see if it's going on the right track before you try delegating it more? That's my take on the thing, honestly.
Let's do one more question. Falso?
Are you muted?
Yep. Yep. Thanks, Heather. Great presentation. Thanks. One thing on the cursor rules, you said like you didn't really use them. I think that if there's a new library or like Instructor, for example, I also have that. Also then use just an MCP, like a scraper, to get all pages to MD files and then write the script to automatically convert them to MDC files and add like a description for your agent. That works really good, can do it really granular. But my actual question is, so you see more and more that a cursor and other things are as like routers, like model routers. You don't have to select your model anymore. So what about that? I mean, I think we're all agreed it's not perfect yet, but are we all going to use it? Do you use it? Like, or do you manage to?
Are you asking me if I believe that will happen, or because I think maybe, but honestly, right now I'm still a hardcore Sonnet 3.5 guy. I just think I had a tweet about this yesterday. I think every model that's come out since then, it feels like having some kind of architecture astronaut, like is like this term that my professor used to say.